Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Nola Hennessy, and you'll hear some ducks and geese that are around me at the moment. They're waiting to be fed. A couple of them are actually fighting, which is not so good, and I have a goose that's right next to me that's going to make noise whenever he or she feels like it. This is my last podcast for a while, and the reason for that is that I need to take time to focus on my 6th book about global peace. And as you would have noticed through the podcast sessions, we've got to the end of the letter Peace, with the last E talking about empathy. And for this podcast session, I'm actually going to read extracts from my 5 books, because each of them has empathy as one of those things that humanity needs to really start to focus on and utilise and be aware of in order for us to get our best outcomes. Each of my books, and I've first started writing nearly 20 years ago, each of them talks about empathy in a different context, but there is that underlying theme about empathy being so important for us. The level of compassion, which is the C in my new model for peace, the level of compassion that we show towards our fellow human beings and animals and the environment is really going to determine our destiny as a species. If we are not compassionate and we don't start to demonstrate empathy for our impact on and the feelings of others, we will lead to our own demise. There's no doubt about it. We know that we have such a high level of unrest, violence, power and control struggles, and unless we predominantly recognise and change course, then we will bring about our own extinction. We will either destroy this beautiful environment around us, we will take out all of the other species and therefore not be able to sustain our own species, or we'll simply bomb each other to death. And I'm being blatant with you because I really see that humanity needs to change course. And that's why my focus needs to be not so much on imparting messages this way, but in focusing on getting my book finished. Now, in No Boxing Allowed, there are a number of topics: personal power, positional power, removing baggage, therefore removing anger, growing beyond fear, recognising the traits and actually learning and growing into the traits of great leadership, understanding yourself incredibly well so that you can use your innate power for the benefit of other people, not for destructive purposes. But in here I also form judgments about, and I'm nearly 70 now, and I've lived long enough and experienced enough that I think I can sit and make judgments about how, as a humanity, we've evolved since I was born. So in No Boxing Allowed, in the very first part, in the introduction, I actually talk about empathy by saying people have changed significantly over the decades since the 1950s when I was born. Now people appear to want more, spend more, take, talk, use, discard, waste, punish, demand, and ignore more. But do they give or listen or nurture or empathize or discern or help more? I wonder. I still wonder. It's nearly 20 years since I wrote this book, and I can see us going backwards, not forwards. In chapter 2 about personal power, channeling or giving another person some of your good positive energy is simply about being in the moment with them, being tolerant, loving, kind, considerate, compassionate, understanding, and empathetic. Really listening to them, listening to what is in their heart. In chapter 4, which is about self-exploration, I say every statement that you make has the potential to influence others. Therefore, think and listen twice and speak once. We have 2 ears. We should be able to listen twice as much as we speak. I talk specifically about men sharing their feelings in No Boxing Allowed. There is a whole section on what I believe men, as that half of humanity, what they need to do in order to open themselves up to other feelings, to growing spiritually, to really understanding their power, and the fact that women and men aren't anything other than programmed differently. We're all the same. We are programmed to think certain ways, we are conditioned to think certain ways, and we act upon how we think. It's always refreshing to hear a man talk about his feelings without shame, guilt or fear, and then allow others to empathize with him. When we somewhat expect a woman to open up and talk about feelings, but men are still learning to do that. And you probably would have noticed over the last 10, 15, 20 years that men are actually opening up more. What men need to be able to do, and women also, is to converse human to human, not gender to gender. And for those who don't identify as male or female, they will also need to learn how to communicate and empathize and understand others who do identify strongly as male or female. In my second book, From Premenstrual Syndrome to Positive Mental Attitude, in short, from PMS to PMA, this is a change management guide for women and their men. And there is a lot in here about women recognising and men recognising that PMS is not an excuse for being horrible. And we actually need to cut it out. We need to not tolerate women using PMS as an excuse. But there are also, this book is also, the underlying messages in this book are about recognising the signs of abusive and controlling relationships. I wrote this to help women understand that they can't be horrible just because it's that time of the month, that men need to not give women a free pass because it's that time of the month. We as a humanity need to check ourselves and start treating each other with the courtesy that's deserved. Now, there's always going to be exceptions, but in here I have a change management guide that, step by step, what women and men need to do. A lot of the norms that have been programmed into us, I challenge them in here and I give factual evidence why they should be challenged. There are several case studies, but ultimately, this at the moment is our highest selling book globally, and I'm glad to see that, because when I wrote it, I thought it might take a while for the message to start sinking in, but this is ultimately going to give women and men a very bright light at the end of the proverbial tunnel to walk towards. But it relies on women healing themselves from their emotional baggage. Absolutely relies on women letting go of the baggage and not allowing it to come forward every time they get their menstrual cycle and as women go through menopause. When I went through menopause, which is 15 plus years ago, it was like one day no different to the next. It literally was a transition that I had no recognition that it happened other than the stopping of a cycle. And the reason for that is that I'd exfoliated all of my emotional baggage for the past 5 decades. That was the foundation for being able to transition through menopause without any emotional upheaval, without any night sweats, without any mental confusion, all of those things. Absolutely imperative that women read this if they want to have harmonious relationships. Now, when I extracted from my books in order to have this session, I only picked up where empathy was relevant in the book. And there's definitely a spot within this book in part 1, chapter 1, which is recognising the signs of abusive and controlling relationships. Fundamentally is don't suffer it, change it. Don't make excuses and don't play victim. You need to change your circumstances, make choices and act on those choices. Perhaps you lack the confidence to speak up. Perhaps you lack a positive mindset and foresee negativity and threat with the making of change. Perhaps you haven't worked up the contingency plan to activate on your way out of that abusive relationship. Whatever the reason you choose to stay in a toxic relationship or one you know doesn't fulfill you completely, you are choosing to be a victim. You are choosing to be a victim. Victims of events that are completely out of their control deserve our care, compassion, and empathy. However, if you choose to stay and you know there are ways out, there are always going to be avenues for help. You speak up, you reach out, and you take those opportunities when you find them. If you don't then choose to remedy a situation, you continue to suffer it, but you refuse to change it, then why should anybody actually empathize with your situation if you're not prepared to take control of your outcomes? A positive mental attitude and very strong focus on making constructive change for the betterment of yourself, first and foremost, and your children, who will naturally benefit from the right changes, even if it's not noticeable quite at the time, is the best step in the right direction. Now, there were 2 books that I've written about post-traumatic stress. The child's book, the Serenidad book, is actually a book written for children under the age of 15. And Serenidad is the little girl who learned to fly free. Now that actually is founded on my childhood. So it is, whilst it is written as a fictional character, there are very strong facts that I've drawn from in my childhood in order to write that. But the adult book, and this is the one that I want to talk about first, the adult book is Post-Traumatic Stress, Not a Life Sentence, Viewing Trauma and Its Effects Through a Resilience Lens. So you'll notice here that I don't have the D at the end. There's no PTSD. Drop the D, forget about that, deprogram yourself to that, and understand that anybody who is programming you to stay in a disabled, disordered way is actually only doing it for their own benefit. And I'm going to challenge every psychologist and every psychiatrist, and I've had them working for me over my career. I'm going to challenge every psych to drop the D, because if we don't, we will perpetuate a victim mindset. Through my own work, through self-hypnosis, through hypnotherapy, and I am a qualified hypnotherapist myself, through my own work, I've been able to completely remove the residual effects of past traumas. So there is, for more than 20 years, I've not had any flashbacks, I've not had any nightmares, I've not had anything other than there's a recollection of some traumatic events, and I know there might be a level of sadness at times, but it's a sadness that's disconnected. It's not a sadness that impacts me at a conscious level where I cannot function as a result of remembering that traumatic event that occurred. So in this book, I talk about empathy. There are a number of references to empathy in here, but the one thing that I want to draw to your attention is in chapter 3, which is understanding the impact of trauma in experience terms. And from experience comes resilience. Most things we experience in our lives are still worthy of our reflection, noting any lessons learned and then applying those lessons, as this is what will contribute most profoundly to your growth in life and help improve your ability to be empathetic towards and compassionate with others. Learning lessons from experience is great, but remember, if you don't apply the learnings and see the results of that application, the wisdom will never come. Now, you have to heal yourself and be selfless in order to be empathetic towards another. Whilst ever you are managing your own emotional response to something, and that is first and foremost your absolute number one priority every day, your capacity to be empathetic towards other people is greatly diminished. Now in Feronia, noting that it's written fictionally, but it's based on experiences in my own childhood, I talk about empathy in the context of grade school. So in here, I write about my grade school education. The standard of education was considered high. I went to what was called a demonstration school, where the teachers used to sit around the perimeter of the room and watch the students in the middle. But the atmosphere at the school lacked something. In later years, Feronia came to realise it lacked empathy. That school was high on discipline and low on compassion. Compassion underpins empathy. The C in peace is about compassion. The E, the last E, is about empathy. Now, whilst I wrote my autobiography over 10 years ago now, but it was first published around 2014 in the US, subsequently published by my company in Australia around 2016. The Peace Angel, taking her tears and hanging them out to dry. This is my memoir. When I had it edited by the original publisher in Dallas, they took a lot of things out. Mainly because they were incredibly focused on getting a message, a certain narrative about religion, about God, about heaven and hell, as they saw hell was really important. In here I challenge that and actually say there is no hell. Hell is what we bring to our lives on earth. There is a higher spiritual environment, call it heaven, where our souls resonate at peak. I've been there, and I have written this book based on my experiences at a deeply spiritual level. I also know that God exists, so I challenge people who wish to discount the value of God. I don't agree with the Bible. You know, any document that talks about what God wants, that was written by people who have a particular narrative. My experience was so profound, it changed my life. But in here, I talk about empathy in a few different ways. But the one that I want to read out today is this. It's in the epilogue, which is at the end. Most importantly, I remain grateful for the lessons I've learned, as hard as they have been sometimes. I've shared my soul in this autobiography. I hope that in some small way it illuminates lessons for you, or inspires you to a better outcome. There are so many who have lived a harsher life than mine, and they have my deepest empathy. if I can bring value or healing to your life, then my life on this earth will have been a worthwhile, most worthwhile nanosecond in humanity's journey. As I said, my podcast sessions will now cease. If I feel that there's something particularly important to communicate, I will. But until such times as I do, I'll be focused on my 6th book on world peace. Bye for now, folks. See you next time.